also about, well, the previous one's tangentially about wind turbines. This one is more directly about wind turbines. So Henrik Ramos will talk about highly nonlinear wave impacts on offshore structures and turbines. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me to take part in this program here. Very happy to be here this week. And it's been very nice so far. So yes, I'd like to give this talk about the impact from highly nonlinear waves on walls and the substructures of wind turbines. And say this particular sequence also kind of reflects my path through research, because I started out in wave theory and went on to impacts on walls, which I did in Bristol with Howard Pilgrim here in UK. And now my field of work is wind turbines, and I'm, so to speak, the wave hydrodynamicist at DTU Wind Energy, which is DTU's wind energy department. So my talk is composed from two separate other talks. So to give a little bit of an overview, I decided to make a map here on the board of what we're going through. So the first thing here is impacts at walls. And this topic pretty much picks up from Mark Cooper's talk last week. And Mark Cooper talked about the pressure impulse theory. And he also mentioned this flip-through wave impact. And I'm going to tell about some experiments on the flip-through impacts, which were done at the Plymouth University in their wave room. And I made some computations which reproduced the experiment, and we had a paper on that together. So I'll show you some of that. So the main part is then the numerical reproduction with the same solver as Mark Cooper used in his time when he looked at the flip-through impacts. Then the next thing is when we have these violent impacts on walls, then quite often you would go to the lab and you would do some experiments and you would have some pressures measured. But then you will also know that if you have pockets of air which are entrapped at the wall, you may have scale effects. So there's a section here which is the effects of scale and aeration. So if we make a picture here of a wave which is about to impact on a wall, then if we enclose a pocket like that, and the wall is here, then the air inside that pocket, which would initially be at atmospheric pressure, at least when we started the experiment, will be compressed. And then depending on how big your wave is, the air will feel more or less soft relatively to the pressures that can be exerted by the fluid. So that's the scale effect. We have looked into that. So that's the scale. The other thing is the aeration. So, which means, have we had wave breaking? It's quite likely that we will have small bubbles of air in trains. We saw examples in the previous talk. So, say the general effect of that is that suddenly this water, which was initially nearly incompressible, will be effectively compressible because we can compress all the air which is mixed into it. So what's the effect of having some aeration which can cause compressibility of the water column? So these two things, I will give some examples of that. It's all numerical. I will have one example of what we call a high aeration impact. High aeration. And that's one of these with a pocket. So that's why we call it high aeration. And we will look at the scale effect. And then I will have another example of the flip-through. And for that one, we will look at the aeration. So for a flip-through impact, which is the one that does not entrap a pocket, what does aeration do for us? And that's the wall business. So then we will get onto hydrodynamic loads. On cylinders. So this is where we move into the wind energy topic. Most wind turbines, they are placed on monopiles, which are essentially circular cylinders, if you see it from the water's point of view. So the interest in hydrodynamic loads on these cylinders is then to compute the stresses and the response of these wind turbine structures. So of course, there's a huge dependence to the wave amplitude. You can have very gentle waves, then linear theory is sufficient and easy, nice. But of course, you can also have near-breaking large amplitude waves. And that's where the scientific challenge is, of course, just now. We can get specialized loads, which can lead to what is called ringing. So ringing is this high-frequency response. You have a wave coming in. It has some higher harmonic load components, which can excite a natural frequency of the structure, which may be well beyond the linear wave frequency range. And John Grohe has made experiments on that and published on that. And we have some results as well, which I will present. If you move to shallow water, you may see a similar effect, but which is not kind of resonated up slowly, but it's simply like if you hit the structure with a big hammer. So more an impulsive excitation. So that's a very related phenomenon, impulsive. Excitation, we have some measurements which show that as well. So these measurements is the next part of the talk. So physical model tests. Have you ever heard of a model test which was not physical? Well, now you know. We did two sets of tests. These tests were done by DHI, usually known as the Danish Hydraulic Institute. Now it's just called DHI. We had a collaborative project. Johan, which you may know, works for DHI. So we had some experiments carried on. Some were for a fixed cylinder. And it turns out it was not that fixed. It did have a natural frequency which could be excited. And the others, they were for a flexible cylinder. So we made some experiments where we specifically designed a cylinder to have the first two natural frequencies in the right place relative to the incoming waves. And then we were interested in seeing how can that cylinder then be excited in the experiments. So for this flexible cylinder, we could look at the accelerations. And then the obvious question is, of course, which waves give the largest accelerations of the cylinder? So which can be the most violent? And then we looked into numerical reproductions of these experiments as well. Another topic we have worked upon is a coupled CFD solver. So now you have this cylinder in waves. You may have overturning waves that can hit the cylinder. That can be computed with a VOF method, the volume of fluid. So of course it's all nice and attractive. You can have this situation, but you also know that you cannot have a big domain because it takes a lot of CPU and memory. So what you want to do is you want to have an inner domain where you can run this CFD solver. And then if you could have an outer solver outside of that inner domain, which could kind of handle the larger wave field, then you would be able to compute much more realistic Cs and say forces from that. So that is this coupled solver, what that is about. And then finally, say for these wind turbine structures, we looked at the structural response in a numerical study. The purpose here was to look at the effect of wave nonlinearity. So effect of wave non-linearity, because most wind turbines, they are designed for fatigue with just linear wave theory. And then for the ultimate loads, the largest wave loads, you use regular wave theory, the Fenton theory, which John Grohe presented. But every day the turbine sees waves. To which extent does the abundance of wave nonlinearity in these calculations affect the lifetime of the wind turbine? So that's the circle of the talk. And we will start out with the impacts on Morse. Here we are. So here's a picture of a coastal wall. It's from the island of Alderney in the French Channel. And you see a shed here, and that shed is about 2 meters high. And then we have the breakwater seen from the inside. We have waves from the Atlantic which are banging in, and then they're shooting up these air-water mixtures into the air. It's 1.4 kilometers long totally, this breakwater, so it's a very long one. So it's impacts of this type which we call the violent breaking wave impacts. And the thing having a wall there exaggerates the violence, because when the water impacts, it cannot go anywhere around. It has to kind of remain in its quasi-2D path. So you cannot escape, then you need a big pressure to be shoot up and away. So you get these big pressures. If we look at the shape of the waves which impact, then we can have, typically they will propagate over some berm or some, say, reduction of depth, and they may overturn and create what we call a high aeration impact. They may also kind of reflect. That could even be a simple linear wave, so a gentle reflection. We call that a low aeration wave. There's not much air involved. And then in between, of course, you have a range. And interestingly, the most violent impacts, they are the ones which are just entrapping a small pocket of air. And that also means that the limiting case, the one which is just about to entrap something, but then the trough flips up, they have very large pressures. These are the ones that are called flip-through impacts. So here are some pressure records. They are also from the Plymouth University. A typical low aeration here, where different sensors at the wall don't see much, and then suddenly it's hit by water. You get a pressure spike, peak, and it decays again. This is a millisecond time scale. It's a lab scale. Whereas this one here has a clear sign of an air pocket, because you have this oscillatory pressure history where the pocket oscillates during the impact. But what if you get the case which is just before, just about to trap a pocket of air, but actually does not do it? That's the flip through. And here are some numerical results. So imagine this is a snapshot of the surface profile just before impact. And then as the time goes, it moves closer to the wall, and also here it moves up. So it's almost like a focusing of the water. And then depending on your initial conditions, you may get the situation where instead of this one winning and closing the gap, actually the trough is the winner. The trough shoots up. You get huge accelerations because every particle wants to pass through this point here. And these accelerations, they of course need a big pressure to be generated. So you have a large impact pressure just here, say at the root of the jet.
Is that 10 G or is that 10,000 G?
10,000 G.
There should be a comma there.
Yeah, it depends on where you. Yeah, I agree. And in Denmark, we are so stupid that we put a point. And embarrassingly, that made it through to the slides. So Cougar and Peregrine, 1990, invented this flip-through term because the trough here flips through this gap here, which is nearly closed before the impact. And in a paper from 91, they quoted vertical accelerations numerically obtained exceeding 10,000 g. And I think there have been even studies with large accelerations. So that's a flip-through impact. And the nice thing about it is that actually this surface here is a smooth curve. So you can compute it with potential flow theory. Of course, you need a Lagrangian scheme to track the points. But say the interior of the fluid is not disconnected or there's no topology changes. So if your method is good enough, you have a very smooth and well-defined mathematical problem that gives you these big pressures. So of course this links with Mark Kuga's talk from last week. Plymouth University did some experiments in 2008. They were carried out by Alison Honraby, Ravinder Jaratne, and Jeff Bullock. The waveflume looked like this. There was a berm here, which was an idealized version of the Alderney breakwater. And then we had some wave probes along, and then we got impacts up here. So I think I will show just some video frames from that, from the flip-through impact we obtained. So here we are. So this is the wall. This is the surface of the wave coming in. This is the bottom. Then you have a slope, and then you have kind of the offshore deeper water out here, which is 4 times as deep as in here. So now we will see this wave. It approaches. We can see the profile there. Gets closer, 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 closer. And everybody, at least if you hadn't seen my previous slides, would probably guess that we would see an impact now from the front, horizontal impact. But what we now see is the shoot up, and now it's kind of droplets coming up, and now the jet is developed and it shoots up, and that's it. So this was this experiment for a flip-through wave impact. Then my job was then to try to reproduce it numerically. And I had the same boundary integral solver as Mark Kruger had, which has been developed in Bristol. There's some references here. And then I extended it to include this mount shape, which is a piecewise linear mount shape. So here are the same pictures as before, but with a numerical solution overlaid. So what you have to do, or what I did, was to take measurements from these wave gauges, the first 3, and then you do some linear analysis to capture the linear wave pattern. It's not too far off because it's quite relatively small amplitude waves out here. And then you propagate that into the wall and you get the impact. So it looks like this, and the last 2 frames looks like that and like that. And here it's difficult to see in this view, but the jet is kind of shooting up there. And this is the final picture of the final evolution. So now, of course, it's interesting if we can compare the measured pressures to the computed pressures. So these are the measured pressures. And you see one is kind of clear. You get a clear spike. It's about 20 rho g h, where h is the wall depth at still water. And then the next one here is too large up to see much. And down below here, this curve here is the one which can be compared to that one. So we see when the computation stops, we haven't got up to 21 rho g h, but we are on the way. It seems it will not get all the way up there. But at least that's how far we get with this potential flow model. And this is where it stops. So how come it's not better? How come we cannot get closer? I have some likely causes here. So one is that, say, the impact pressure is very sensitive to the shape of the wave that impacts. So if you don't get the exact right profile, then you will get another impact, you will get another balance between the focusing of those 2. So that's kind of up to the accuracy of your wave analysis. The other thing is that if you look kind of across the wave front, it's meant to be a 2D experiment, but you will quite often see some 3D variability across. So it's very seldomly that you would measure with 2 pressure probes the same pressure history. So that's the background for that. Honor?
What is the reason the numerical scheme stops? Because you stopped there in the calculation.
Yeah, I think the curvatures got too big.
So that's in the bottom the problem, I think.
Yeah, it's probably here. Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's the old one, but I mean yours in the bottom left figure, bottom right figure. That's your new one, right? The
Bottom
2-1.
right, so that one, right?
Yeah. Why do you stop? Because the curvature is too down.
It broke down the numerical solver. So
What's the reason?
I didn't look into it closely. So yeah,
Is this the one with time-dependent conformal mapping or boundary element method?
it's a boundary element method. It does a conformal map in each time step, yes, but it's only a conformal map for the bottom topography.
Oh, not for the free surface?
Well, okay, yeah, well, that is a transformation, right? So the surface is, yes, transformed in every time step, back and forth.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, but don't you have problems with resolution at the crest? With
Yes,
the conformal
yes.
mapping?
So we are throwing a lot of points here. So I think there are like 1,000 points along that curve.
So, what is z equals 10, z equals 10 reduced? What are the two curves in both cases?
Yeah. Then in the paper, in order to get a little bit beyond this time instant here, I repeated the computations with I think a 2% or 5%, I don't remember now, reduction of all the wave amplitudes. So then you get an impact that is weaker, but then you can carry on for longer time. Yeah, and I think I have that on the next slide. This is time, and this is the coordinate of the water. So say for a fixed instant of time, we can look at the pressure profile. So what you see here in the computation, which is to replicate the experiment, is that you have this concentrated pressure just here, the impact zone. Mark also commented that say it's always kind of off the wall, the impact pressure is. This one is for the computation that could last slightly longer. So here you can actually see that there is you can more clearly see there's a maximum coming there. So what is now the effect of if you have some air in the water, and you may have a pocket trapped, or you may have some small air bubbles entrained, what would be the effect of that on these impact pressures? So this is a picture essentially the same as the drawing down there. So you can have a pocket or you can have small bubbles. The interest for this was the scaling issue. So you go to the lab, you do some tests, but you have a scale dependency on the softness or stiffness of the air, and also on the entrainment process for the bubbles. So we were interested in that. So we made a numerical method which could compute flows like this with mixed water and air. So here's an outline of, these are the equations we're solving. So it's essentially conservation of mass and momentum in two directions. And then this one here is conservation of gas mass. So we consider a two-phase flow with pure liquid, which is incompressible, and then some gas, which is compressible. And then we conserve both the total mass and the gas mass. And we conserve the energy here. So that enables us to actually take computations as the one I just showed. And then at some point, we take out an initial condition, and then we run this compressible flow solver with that initial condition and then with boundary conditions taken from here.
Can you go one slide back?
Yeah.
So the energy depends on data. The pressure, does it depend on sigma and E? Is that right?
If you wrote up the adiabatic ideal equation, then you could derive an explicit pressure relation. Here it's implicit, so it's if you know the energy, then you can compute back the pressure. So that allows to have shock waves in the solution. So actually we started out with an explicit relation, and then you will get shock waves, but you cannot be sure that they are right. You may even be sure that they're wrong. So in order to get them right, we included the energy equation and went along with that. Okay, so the good thing about this method is that you can have a very clean initial condition. It's coming out of this potential flow solver. So you reduce your computational time in this compressible model to just kind of the essential impact. So now we made a study where we looked at 3 different impacts. So a flip-through one, the one that does not trap a pocket. A low aeration, that's one which just traps a pocket, so a very small pocket of air. That's the most violent one. And then a high aeration one with a big pocket trap. And then we vary the scale and also the aeration. You can work out from dimensional analysis that your dimensionless pressure, so here expressed as Pmax minus atmospheric pressure and then normalized with atmospheric pressure, will depend on those 2 dimensionless numbers here. So this is the ratio of the dynamic fluid pressure to atmospheric pressure. So that kind of measures the softness of the air. The other one, beta, here is the initial aeration. So we put in some aeration, some gas volume fraction into the fluid, and then we compute and we see the effect. So here's a flip-through impact. This is a snapshot during the impact. So here's the impact zone, the pressure. And this is now again T and Y. So if we look at a line here, we will see the pressure profile at the wall. So this one here is at the time of this snapshot here. So we see we have this impact zone. But now because the water is slightly compressible due to these bubbles, the impact pressure takes some time to propagate down along the wall. So had it been incompressible, they would come kind of instantly, these bottom pressures. But because to the compressibility, they will move around. So it moved around there. So if you have 1% of air in this computation, that's the picture you see. If you increase that to 10%, then the speed of sound drops. So that means you have a longer propagation time. So this curve here has a larger slope. So we did a systematic study on that with flip-through and the other 2 impacts. And we have submitted that 2014.
Can you see a little bit more on the contours? The left one I understand. Everything is white, so that's water.
Oh yeah.
Everything is
Yes.
dark, it's air, but then in
Yes.
the middle, how do I have to,
Yeah.
what do I actually see? Because again,
This is a spatial snapshot of the pressure field. So
so the left was the density. and
this
the
is density,
pressure.
yes. This is pressure. So very white is a high pressure.
Because of the impact.
So we have the largest pressure here. And then it's weaker when we go down the wall and away from the wall.
And far away from the wall on the left, I basically say roughly hydrostatic pressure then, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, roughly. Yes. At least it hasn't kind of sensed the impact.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
When you do these computations in the air above, do you actually have air?
Yes.
So you have a 2 fluid
Yeah.
computation.
Well, it's a pseudo 2 fluid, really, right? Because you have your bulk velocity. The velocity is the velocity of the bulk.
Yeah.
So it's a pseudo 2-phase, if you wish. You use one.
There's one velocity
You
field.
use
Yes.
one equation state to model these 2 fluids together. So that's not a genuine 2-phase, but kind of a pseudo 2-phase, or however you want to switch the pseudo. So what I see there, the back and forth, those are the rays of, that's the reflect. I see streaks in there.
Yeah. Yes. So
That's the speed of sound going
it
up
goes
and down.
down, and then because the wall, the bottom
It goes up.
is also impermeable, so it reflects and goes up. Yeah.
And those angles are the local velocity of sound.
Yes.
Right? That's what I
Yes.
see.
Exactly.
And then at the
and-
bottom there is more air, you say, and therefore the angles are less steep.
Exactly.
Because it's less dense. Yes.
Yeah. So it takes a longer time to come down than it does
But
here.
that's assuming that it's uniform over the whole depth. Why would that be the case? the air. Because that's not, you expected it to be on the top.
Yeah.
You just did that.
I wanted to make a generic study, so I just
Right.
put in a number.
You assumed
Yeah.
that the turbulence had gone all the way down to the bottom and that it was therefore uniform mix.
I think I rather decided for simplicity not to assume something
You just did it.
complicated.
Okay,
So just do something simple and see what comes out. Yeah, yeah,
that's all right.
yes. Okay, so that's one example here of say flip through different aerations. Another example here, that's the low aeration impact, so the one that trapped a small pocket of air. So if we stay in the upper region, we have this small pocket there. We have this big pressure, and we may see, I tell you at least, this region here of pressure is wider, larger than before. And that's because inside the pocket, these pressures, they propagate very quickly around. So the pocket has the role of kind of distributing this big pressure throughout the pocket. Again, we see the wave coming down and then up. And then here we have a regeneration pattern. So this pocket will oscillate. So it will compress. That's what we see here. And then time is this direction. So then we have an expansion. It compresses to a pressure which is lower than atmospheric. And then it will go in again. So this coming in is seen here. And in some cases, you might see resonance. So you may, of course, you can adjust your parameters such that the time of regeneration of pressure from the pocket matches the time of the reflected pressure wave coming back. And there's a paper from a French research group on that as well, which they have looked into that. But what happens if we change the scale?
So,
No,
so this model never entrains air into the fluid.
It never entrains air. No, no. Changing the scale is on another slide, so I just want to move to that.
Well, I don't understand it. If your pocket gets enclosed, then it might then it might mix through, right? So why are you saying it doesn't entrain?
I think those equations preserve the relative mass fraction along trajectories, particle trajectories.
Really?
They are not tracking particle trajectories, no. Because it's Eulerian field equations.
No, but I
which
think
is
if
solved.
you calculate,
But the mass of each component of the fluid is prescribed at time zero.
yes, and it follows a material,
Yeah.
prescribed material path. So if you take those equations, I think I've done this before, and you calculate along the material path,
Yeah.
the mixture is always the same.
Yeah.
The relative fraction.
Yeah.
Because there is no exchange. There's no component exchanging.
There's no
amongst
exchange,
them.
no.
Yeah.
The density is passively affected. I don't think it is.
Well, it's not strictly speaking.
Not
That-
the density,
on
the mass
level,
fraction.
Yeah.
on the level it's calculated,
same,
it
isn't
is. Yeah, on the level it's calculated, it is.
There is a picture here which is perhaps interesting for this discussion because if you look at this pocket here, that is at scale 1 in 16. So that means that's a very small scale. So at this very small scale, dynamic pressures of the fluid, they are very small. And that means relatively to atmospheric pressure, they are nothing. So the pocket feels very stiff. So that also means you don't get significant compression of the air. And actually, some of the air escapes out here through the pocket gap because it does not close fully. Whereas if you crank up the scale to 16, so now we blow everything up by a factor of 256, then at the impact, you will have a very compressed pocket. And there you actually see some breakup, some Rayleigh-Taylor instability of the pocket. So a weak answer to this mixing question is, let's say, at the level of your grid resolution, you may get a breakup of the initial big pocket.
Yeah, that's numerical smearing.
Yeah, but even without numerical smearing, you would, let's say, had I resolved this with infinite resolution, right, very fine resolution, I would still see this picture. But I agree that there is numerical smearing, and that will definitely cause some mixing, which is not physical, it's just coming up.
So we can summarize this like that when you have small pockets, the surface of the bubble, big bubble, remains smooth, and this approach is justified. When it becomes unstable, you need to do something about entrainment. Probably.
I think that is true, because to a finite resolution, eventually you will get below the grid scale, and then you will get some 0.5 number for the mixing. Whereas, of course, in the physics, you will have discrete bubbles. Yeah, sure. I think I will skip on that. So I just want to show one animation of these impacts, because that's also quite instructive. So let's look at this one here. So let's focus on this top frame here. That shows the density, and it's a snapshot of density. And the middle frame will show, and now it's very weak, but it shows the pressures. So now as we go along space, we see how the profile approaches. Now we have a pressure formed. And now this pressure wave is propagating out in the fluid. It's returned at the bed and moves up again. And in this type of plot, which we saw before, is this picture here, right? With a large pressure zone, reflection, and then coming back. And then the funny thing is, if you move to the very large scale, then if you plot it like this, everything looks the same for the initial condition. But now the scale is much larger. So the pocket compresses much more, and you get a much more violent impact zone here in normalized coordinates. So that's the scale effect for the pocket impact. Okay, so that concludes the part about walls. So we have looked at flip-through impact and numerical reproduction. We have looked at scale effects and abrasion effects for these impacts. So now we move into the wind turbine world. And now instead of a wall, it's a circular cylinder. And we look at, say, large forces on these circular cylinders.
It's hard to trap a bubble of air on a circular cylinder.
It must be hard to
Trap a bubble.
yes. And I think one of the obvious things here is that when we had the wall and we had the impact, if it's purely 2D, nobody can escape except kind of off the wall. Whereas if you have a cylinder and you have a wave that overturns, if you had a pocket, you can run out to the sides. So I think these pocket problems are not as relevant for the cylinders as they are for the walls. Abrasion, I think, could be interesting for the cylinders. So this part of the talk summarizes a collaborative project we had with DHI, with DTU Mechanical Engineering, Forskel, it's a Danish funding body, was the main sponsor, and also Statkraft sponsored parts of the work. A lot of people took part, and it's about hydrodynamic loads. So if we have an engineering approach, an engineering view, then we could say, if I want to compute some hydrodynamic loads on a wind turbine structure, then my first thing would be to use linear wave theory. It's in the textbooks, you can code it up easily. And quite often the monopile is very slender relative to the waves. So I could get away with the slender force theory of the Morrison equation. So number one, you do in the course is that you compute the forces with the Morrison equation. There's a drag term, there's an inertia term, and you take the kinematics out of linear wave theory. What if the waves are large amplitude? They may still be smooth, and they may still be large compared to the cylinder, but they may not be linear anymore. So we could have a better approach, which we could still use a Morrison type force model. So base yourself on the undisturbed kinematics, but take kinematics from a fully nonlinear wave model. That would be nice. So we have looked into that. And the other thing is, of course, if you have impacts like this, where you have breaking waves, overturning, splash up, everything, then a potential flow fully nonlinear wave solver does not do the job. So then you would go to CFD, and you would be interested in this coupled CFD. So that kind of outlines what methods are available, and they of course have the different timescales of efficiency. So, for example, CFD, nice for generic studies, not nice for design. Linear wave theory, good for the weak states, for the lifetime calculations. When we talk about offshore wind turbines, loads on cylinders from large waves, then ringing is a very natural thing to bring up. So what is ringing? And there's a paper here by Gro and Huseby, 2002. John is here, which shows some waves here. So here's a wave surface elevation time history. And then here is the structural response of a GBS, so a gravity-based structure. And what we see is that not so much is going on, but then after this big wave, we have excited a response in the structure, and the frequency of that response is much, it's higher, so that means the period is shorter than any visible frequency in the wave signal. So there's a mechanism here which can, through the higher harmonic loads, excite natural frequencies which are outside of the wave frequency range. So it could look like this. If this was the wave frequency and this was the structure as a natural frequency, then the higher harmonic load components, they may excite this thing. And then what you will see is almost like a resonant excitation. So the forcing is there, it is there, then it picks up the structure, and you get this excitation. So, and there have been some theories derived for that. They go to third order. So Fatins, Newman and Minion, 95, Krogstad, 98, Melinikan and Moulin from 95. All regular wave theories in finite depth, and all weakly nonlinear. The outset of this ringing was the offshore oil and gas industry, and that means that we were at deep water initially. So then one relevant question to ask is, what happens if we go to more shallow sites? Because as John also mentioned, these offshore wind turbines, they may not be in completely shallow water, but they are also not in the deep water. So they are in this intermediate region, KH equals about 1, where I say the shallow water effects on nonlinearity are, say, pronounced. We have some measurements. There's a paper by Camp et al. 2003 and 4, two reports actually. They show some measured responses, and what we see is, and it's almost regular waves, and we see, say, this structure is kind of excited with each wave. And we have seen in our experience also, say that these responses, they do not have this character of, say, a build up over a couple of cycles, and then, say, a decay because the forcing disappears. It's more like bang on, so you have more a triangular profile. So it comes up in response, and then it decays. So we call that for impulsive excitation. So we will show some examples of that. We had some physical tests done at the GHI. So here's a picture of, we had one cylinder here, scale 1 to 36. We had another cylinder here, the flexible one, which was 1 to 80. We had a wave basin, wave maker, a slope, a berm, and then for most of our experiments, the cylinder was placed just here, so at the slope. And then we had a lot of wave gauges, so we could measure what does the waves do on the way to the structure. So here are some examples of waves. We had 2D waves first. So here's an example of a regular 2D wave. It's weakly nonlinear. We do have a little bit of this phenomenon down here, which is called the secondary load cycle, which has also been described in papers by John. And we have another example here from the flexible structure, where it's also very linear. But then here we can get to a more nonlinear state. So here we have regular waves, which are not in any sense sinusoidal. Or here we can have regular waves, which are very steep and with very pronounced secondary load cycles. And you can also see these waves, they actually excite the structure so much that it's apparent in the force measurement that it vibrates. So it has a natural frequency just here. And there are other examples here. Irregular waves in 3D, small waves and large waves. And a picture of an impact. I want to tell you a little bit about this one here, the flexible cylinder. Because we have some numerical models for wind turbines, which say under the aerodynamic loads and the wave loads can compute the response. Then you do a lot of, say, 10-minute realizations, and you use that for design, you derive design stresses. And then, of course, what if you get out of a model like that, that you have an excitation of a natural frequency? Then it would be nice to have an experiment where you can compare. So the idea here was to make a cylinder which was flexible and which had the right scaled natural frequencies of the real structure. Because then when these nonlinear waves, they come in, they may excite it, and we can look at the excitation. So we went to the DIY store, we bought this plastic, it's a PVC pipe, standard dimensions, 7.5 centimeters, and then everything else is kind of dictated by the manufacturer, right? So it has a wall thickness, it has a stiffness, it has a damping ratio, it has some density. So that means if you cut it in some length, it will have some natural frequencies and you cannot do much. But then what you can do is, if you make it stiffer than it should have been, then if you mount some masses, point masses, then of course you can adjust the natural frequencies. So that was the idea. So we had these two masses and we designed their position and their mass such that the first and second natural frequencies were matched. So this means, of course, then the shapes of the eigenmodes is not as in the real structure, but you have something that can be excited. Go on. Yeah, so here we are. So here is an example then of a measurement. So we have up here, that's the free surface elevation. So wave signal here, this is the force at the bottom of the cylinder. So now at the bottom you measure a force that will not be the wave's force itself, because the structure can also move. So it's a connection force between the structure and the bed. And then here we have the acceleration. We had 5 accelerometers placed in the structure. So this one here is the acceleration in the uppermost point of the structure. So that's where things are most amplified. We also had a displacement meter. So what we see here is that, you know, sometimes we get these impulsive excitations, where, say, for the biggest waves, we just get a bang, big amplitude of excitation, and then it decays. So a triangular shape. Whereas in other cases, we have kind of more continuous excitation of the ring-like fashion. Springing is the word if you have kind of continuous nonlinear feed-in of energy. So it's springing / ringing for the weaker cases. Then, and now we are getting to this point here, to the accelerations. You could ask, which waves give the largest accelerations of the structure? So which waves are most severe for the structure? And what I did was I took this signal here, which is a free surface elevation, it's measured kind of next to the cylinder. So you go, I don't remember, 40 centimeters, 50 centimeters to the side, and then you put a wave probe. Then of course we can break that up into individual waves. We can detect a period and a height. We can then convert that into a linear deep water wavelength, and then we can plot it in this diagram here. So we have a dimensionless wavelength here and a dimensionless wave stiffness here. So this would be the parameter space of waves when there's no structure. So for each wave we can put a dot which tells this is where the wave belongs. And then because we also have recorded the accelerations, we can then put a color, and that color will then show the largest acceleration recorded during that wave's existence. So that's this scale here. And then of course we are interested, where are the most red spots located? And they are located in this band here. And those two lines here, they are a breaking criterion from GOTA 2010. So that breaking criterion has say a free parameter, and then it says, you know, if you are in between those two values of that, you will be breaking. So, okay, I think most of you would have guessed it's probably the breaking waves. So this plot confirms that's also what we see. The largest accelerations, they occur when the waves are breaking. What happens if we change the depth? So let's look at the lower line here. So now we fix, these are irregular waves, so we fix the significant wave height. We make this plot for then 3 different depths, 20, 30, 40 meters. Now we have 3 different clouds of points. So the first thing we see is, let's say if we move to shallower water, then this cloud of points move into the breaking band. Okay, no surprise. If the depth gets smaller, you have more waves that are breaking. Let's go up, because we can also increase the wave height. So for this larger wave height, 11 meters significant wave height, that's like a storm condition. You also have more breaking waves. The cloud moves up. So, also not surprisingly, the most violent excitations, they occur for the largest wave height at the smallest depth, just about here. So that's for the most violent. But we can also see a change of color. So the bulk part of the signal is actually has larger accelerations at the deeper water. So we saw first, okay, extreme impacts, they are most severe in shallow, but the everyday population during the storm gives the largest accelerations at the larger depth. And then when you think a bit about it, it's not a big mystery, because what happens is that if you have a depth of 40 meters, then of course you have a larger depth where you are exposed to the water. And of course you also have a longer arm. So if you come with some force and you want to excite your structure, then your moment arm down to the bottom is larger. So it's a moment arm and exposed depth phenomena which explains for the bulk accelerations, and then for the shallow water, it's the nonlinearity and breaking that gives the most extremes here. So that was the accelerations. Then our next thing was to move into, could we reproduce these things numerically? So we have at DTU a fully nonlinear wave model. It's called Ocean Wave 3D, NC Karup, Bingham and Lindberg 2009, which solves the Laplace equation with its fully nonlinear boundary conditions. It's a 3D formulation so far. No, not so far. For these results, we have run it just in 2D. So you run it, you make some linear wave detection for your wave field. You take the kinematics out at the place of the structure. You apply a force model. usually you would go with Morrison. There's an extension of the Morrison model, which is called Rainey's force model. We use that instead. And then you can combine that with a structural model for your flexible structure. And then you see, can we reproduce something? So here's a reproduction of a response at 40 meters of depth. The red one is measured, the blue one is computed. So the waves are reproduced quite well. Here is the acceleration. So for the big wave, we actually got this right response in the model. We see here for the weaker ringing event, we probably got a little bit too much in the computation. So one of the things to look into here is the models, the numerical models representation of wave breaking. Because if the wave gets too large, you will get too large a force. So you need some filter that can take out energy. But overall, it looks quite promising. And if you go to 20 meter, you have even more linearity. And here, we can get good matches in some situations. In other situations, we don't have the same good match. So that's something to work on, but it's promising. I think we are approaching end of time, and there's a lot still in the talk. So I think it's better to stop, isn't it? Instead of dragging over time.
I think it's good.
Yeah.
Maybe if somebody wants to see the rest of the slides, you can stay afterwards.
I was just gonna comment, there's gonna be a talk tomorrow, introduced at a later stage on OpenFOAM for this problem.
Oh yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I can't remember the chap's name, but.
Yes. That's Hørje Jarsak
Yes,
from Wiki.
okay,
Yeah,
so you know more than we do.
Well, yeah. Johan also collaborates with him.
And Rod Rainey is coming tomorrow.
Yes, that's true. Yes. Yeah. So what I can say is the rest of the talk is about how we couple this potential flow solver and the OpenFOAM CFD. And
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I think. Yeah, okay. So if you take back to the experimental conditions, where you did the measurements. Yes, then back. One back again. Forward. This. Yeah, this. So these are physical laboratory experiments.
Yeah.
You give a spectrum. Yeah. So if you now take this HS.
Yeah.
And over H, well, you have this 11 meter over 20, say 21 then.
yeah.
So that is a very strong. That's higher than what Malin had in his wind experiments.
Yeah.
So it's really. But okay, so it's you see it's HS over H is about between 0.5 and 0.55.
Yeah.
So it's just very well what we saw in the lab.
Yeah. And these are also generated with linear wave generation theory.
Okay, good. Yeah.
So and we actually also see in front of the wave maker, we have some break.
Yeah,
So
of course, you
yeah.
always have that, but I mean, in
Yes.
the far field, I mean, it didn't kill the wave in the far field. But you
No.
see one, it's basically the same range.
Yeah, yes.
When you go down.
Yes.
So it's, you have a decline for the very long waves there, you have a decline. You have a decline for H over L naught, when that goes down to -2. So long waves, in the long wave range, and there you have really a decline in the wave.
Yeah, and they are all inside this band here of Gode. So that was quite instructive. Tom?
Since the pressure field is so sensitive to the way the free surface meets the wall, have you looked at what happens when you use a viscous free surface boundary condition? Viscous free surface boundary conditions are vastly more complicated.
Yeah. Yes.
And you think there might be some effect there.
Yeah. So do you mean in the potential flow solver, if one should introduce a term, or in the CFD
Well,
solver?
just in general.
Yeah.
Just in general, I mean, you get all these extra terms in the tangential and normal stresses.
Yeah. So in the CFD solver, in the OpenFOAM solver, it's the Navier-Stokes equations. We have, say, the standard viscous term.
Okay, yes, but I'm talking about the free surface boundary condition.
Okay,
Different
no.
matter.
Okay, we haven't looked into that at all. No.
So if you have you have geometry of the incoming wave such that you have no big bubble, but you have a fraction in the water.
Yeah.
How does the result depend on the amount of this fraction?
Yeah, the pressures, they go down when you put air.
Yeah,
inside.
the pressure, I understand that the peak would be smoothed.
Yeah, yeah.
Is an integral of the pressure
Yeah,
peak
yeah.
preserved?
Yes. As far as I remember, the forces go down as well. And I also looked at the impulse, so the force integrated over time.
Yeah, force integrated over
Yeah.
time. So
Yes.
does it go down?
I don't remember. I can easily check and come back.
Any further questions? Thank you.